Hi, Family Centre Tribe. It's Bec from the Family Centre, and I have a very special guest today, and that is a good old friend of mine and of the Family Centre's, Joe Solowieczyck. Joe is a diabetes educator and family therapist. He also lives with type 1 diabetes, and he wrote a fantastic book, and if you haven't read it, you must check it out, called The Type 1 Diabetes Guide to the Universe. We have a couple of copies here on the iPads at the Family Centre, and it's a really amazing, rich source of information on all things diabetes, because Joe works with people with type 1 diabetes every day and has a huge amount of experience. So welcome, Joe. Thanks for coming online.
Thanks, Bec, and thanks for the plug, and thanks for the welcome. I feel like there in your office.
Oh, well, Joe joins us all the way from Montana. I should have said that. So that's why it's dark where he is and daylight where I am. So really chuffed that you stayed up for us, Joe. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Tell us what's happening in your world over there in the US. What's it like? What's it like?
Yeah, I think like in your world, everything is turned upside down. It's a good job. It's a good time to be a nurse. Nursing jobs are all over the place, and you're getting paid very well. People are struggling for resources, misinformation, wrong information, lots of information, too much information. Things are pretty closed down throughout the United States, except for 5 states. Montana is one of the states that said to stay at home, not shelter at home yet, like in California or in New York, but stay at home. Non-essential services are closed. Supermarkets are open. Pharmacies are open. It has not been difficult yet to get any diabetes supplies. And those channels seem to be open and working well. It's a little scary, though, I got to say, just in terms of, I think, for those of us with diabetes and parents of kids with diabetes, the thing that I think that's really pushing on this whole kind of thing is, I don't know about everybody else, but I have a tremendous, profound sense of powerlessness connected to the COVID-19 thing. And I think, as I've spoken about before, there seems to be a connection to that powerlessness experience of parents of kids with diabetes and kids with diabetes and persons with diabetes in terms of we were powerless to get it. At the core, I think, of coming to terms with living with this thing is this concept of powerlessness. And it doesn't mean that we're powerless to do things. It just means that we couldn't do anything about that part of it. And getting the disease. There was nothing to do to prevent it. There's nothing to do that we can do as parents that can make it go away. There's nothing that we as people who live with the disease can do to not have it, despite our best wishes. And so there's a certain associated sense of powerlessness. And I think that this, as I've spoken with patients over the last several months, and myself as well, just coming to terms with some of the exaggerated feelings of isolation, anger, resentment, all connected in a funny kind of way to the taproot nerve of powerlessness, meaning powerless to have our lives turned upside down by the virus thing, powerless to have our jobs changed completely, powerless to not be able to go to school. There were kids that I spoke to this past month who were supposed to go to their prom and graduate high school this year. And this is the one thing that they've been looking forward to for the past, I don't know, 9 years, right? Just, I can't wait to become a senior to go to my prom, you know? It's not happening. There are kids who have signed up to go to college and university. It's not happening. You know, there are things that are happening that nobody planned for, and everything's turned upside down, which I think contributes to a sense of powerlessness. And so the question remains, I think, how do we feel and stay vital and feel in charge of what we can be in charge of while not being overwhelmed by that sense of powerlessness? I have to admit that today I felt the wave of powerlessness hit me. Just having to do things telephonically, telehealth, on a day-to-day basis. We're not seeing patients anymore. Most clinics are closed. Outpatient services throughout most of the country are being done by telephonic care, telehealth, Skype for Business, Zoom, that kind of stuff. And it's a whole different thing than seeing someone, meeting with them, shaking hands, pressing flesh, talking, joking, that kind of stuff. And what we get is that we get that there's so much more to interactions and communication than just the words.
Mm.
There are other things that we pick up when we're in contact with each other that are meaningful and nourishing. And so how do we keep that going, during these trying times? So it's upside down, or as I think you guys would say, pear-shaped.
Pear-shaped. Yeah, that's right. And so I do want to pick up on that powerlessness point in relation to something that I was talking with one of our community members with the other day about, do people with type 1 have a special adaptability to this feeling of powerlessness, because we've already done this, this has landed for us, and we know what this feels like. So there's sort of maybe potentially a bit of a sense of familiarity with what's happening here. But let's park that for the minute, because I'm interested to hear, when you said I had a day where I felt powerless today, what do you do as Joe when you have a day like that? What are your strategies to combat that?
For me, and the things that I recommend to the families that I work with and to the kids and adults that I work with is that there's this sort of fine balance between not overindulging, but not making believe that it's not happening. So I felt really sort of alienated today from the whole scene, the world. And it was uncomfortable. And I have to work really hard, and I encourage people who I work with to do the same thing, of like not overindulging it, but not making believe that you don't feel it. And then I think that the way we all have different personalities. Some people, have some friends who are like, okay, just got to like take it on the chin and move forward and everything's okay and that kind of thing. And I have nothing against those people. And I'm not saying that they need to embrace the sadness or the feelings that are difficult that come along with this thing. But I think whatever feelings come up is to walk through them and not make believe they're not there. So that was key for me today. And it's easier for me and for people that I work with to move in and out of those feelings while being honest and having a sense of integrity about ourselves and our experiences. So I think that's the hardest thing, and it applies to coming to terms with diabetes as well. Meaning that I think people with diabetes are, yes, we have some experience in that department of powerlessness. But depending on which side of the bed you wake up on in the morning will determine whether or not you're on the plus side of that or the negative side of that. Whether you're going to be pissing and moaning or whether you're going to be going, I got this because I know how to handle this, So there are so many things that influence how you end up doing it, The thing that's been difficult for a lot of people has just been staying active. You were talking about before about some people are overdoing it, some people aren't doing it enough. And the thing is that I think activity contributes so much to managing diabetes well, physical exercise. And it's also mentally stabilizing as well, and refreshing and nourishing. And for those of us who are not able to do it, it takes a certain toll. So I would say to be as active as possible while not overdoing it, but doing your best to get something in on a daily basis, and to be able to have like home slices and your peeps to be able to just talk to about how frustrating it might be to have to make changes. I don't know about you, but I sort of hate change in a lot of ways. I hate being bored, but I also hate change because it means that I have to change my basal rates. And it means that I have to, I have to do this and I have to do that. And I feel like, it's not hard for me to start whining and pissing and moaning about how horrible it is or how difficult it is. So you just have to catch yourself. I say the serenity prayer a lot. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's helpful. And I think a lot of people, once they come to terms with the fact that they might be having a hard time, then just to acknowledge that is somewhat freeing, as opposed to battling with ghosts or trying to punch your way out of a paper bag.
Mm. I think that permission point is really important. Giving yourself the permission to feel what comes up here. And I feel as the conversations that I've been having with others is there's almost this sense of guilt of, you know, I'm sitting inside and I'm watching Netflix because I'm on downtime, and I feel guilty for saying that I feel bored or isolated or lonely, or I'm having emotional big meltdowns, or big stuff is coming up, because I feel like I'm not allowed to say that. And I think that the permission piece is really important, but then that other piece that you've just picked up on, which I think I can attribute this to you, Joe, because I say this all the time, is this idea of you can have a pity party. It's
Yeah,
allowed, but you can't unpack and live there. You
exactly.
know, I think that's a you saying, and I think that's so true in this point. We're allowed to have this stuff. It is going to come up for everyone. This is a weird and strange time, and people are adjusting and coping in all sorts of different ways. But it is down to us as people who, from a medical and mental health perspective, really need to get up and commit to being active, commit to our routines, commit to giving energy and attention to our diabetes management, to step up and do that, even though things feel overwhelming at this time.
Here's the deal. That being said, this is the first time for most of us on the planet to ever go through anything like this. And I would say that having diabetes is like having another full-time job. I often say that. The only problem is that we don't get paid for it. And the thing is that I think managing the emotional aspects, a friend of mine was talking about this today, and she said that that she feels guilty sometimes about being in her house, and she does not have diabetes. She feels guilty about being in her house and just watching TV, or feeling paralyzed by fear, or feeling this kind of stuff. And I think what we're talking about is another full-time job, sort of emotionally managing the sense that we don't know what's coming down the road, nor do we know what life is going to look like 6 months from here. Clearly, it will be a seminal event and things will be different. I don't think life after will be the same exactly as life was before. And so just coping with that takes energy as well. So if one thinks that they're lazing around doing nothing, or that they're having these feelings of anger or sadness or despair, or it's really important not to think that you shouldn't have those. Right? The should thing is the worst word in the, you know, in the language. You should, you shouldn't, you know, this kind of stuff, right? You should behave yourself, you should blah, blah, blah. The thing is that I think those are two big things that particularly people with diabetes are dealing with. The sense of, I have to manage my diabetes, and I'm scared out of my pants some days. I'm not sure what the future, all of these things, they're profound and deep and big. So just to give ourselves a break and to at least have some people to talk about it with. This does not, I think, require a fix. Meaning, it's not something where I would have a conversation with you and you should say, oh, you should go swim. Or, oh, you should think about positive thoughts. Or you should, you know, that might be helpful, right? But this is more of a thing of being heard by other people, which in this situation is so difficult. We were talking about that before, about not feeling the energy of a handshake or a touch or a hug or, you know, a kiss or something like that. And how we miss that, you know, the missing of that is also a huge thing. So all of this stuff taken on top of the fact that we also already manage our diabetes, and we have the other stuff that other people who don't. The one thing I'm terrified about is the supply chain going down for insulin. That I think about what would happen, you know. So I think, well, I'll get in my truck and drive through a pharmacy and get to the back where the locked things are and take the insulin that I need. You know, I feel like zombie apocalypse. You know, sometimes I'm thinking about this stuff. I can't imagine a lot of people don't think about this stuff. But what you would do in case, you know, and all kinds of in-case scenarios and stuff like that. And then on top of that, you got to stay on top of your diabetes, you know. So I think it's time for not self-flagellating and not being too hard on ourselves. And whatever comes up, let it bubble up. As long as you let it bubble, if you push it down, it'll come out sideways harder. Just let it bubble up, and your friends will tell you if you're whining or complaining too much. Mine do.
I think that's a really good call for connecting in with the tribe. And in particular, if you're part of an online community of people with type 1 diabetes, I mean, they're the places, and I know we can't hug or shake hands, and I fully intend when all this is over to pretty much hug everybody I see. But that really is, and we've seen the activity in our online communities go through the roof in the last few weeks. And I think that is people reaching out for connection. And I think that it is important that those communities hold space for whatever comes up, because there can be a sense of, wow, we're going to regulate this community, this is a positive space. But if you're feeling angry or sad or confused or frustrated, that's all valid, and that's the kind of stuff that others can help connect with if they're feeling that too. So I think that, again, it's kind of giving permission for this stuff to not only bubble up, but to express it, and with your family or your people who you're with, or online through the tribe. There are a couple of really good ways to do it there.
Great. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. And tell me what's happening from a diabetes perspective in your world. We've talked a fair bit about how the mental health piece and staying mentally well, but are you seeing people with blood sugar levels that are elevated, different? What are the kinds of things that are coming up in your practice?
No, I think the things that are coming up are, I think people's blood sugar numbers are sort of the same as they were before. I think a lot of people take care of themselves. I think a small percentage take care of themselves. A lot of people don't, just because that's the nature of the disease and that kind of thing. But I think that what's going on is parents are having a harder time sort of getting their kids to do the diabetes stuff in the context. There's an added level of tension in the home environments that requires parents to get some help, I think, and some support to just sort of set some structure, but not be too tight about it. To loosen the reins up a little bit, but not let it all fall, not let it go to hell in a handbasket kind of a thing, to be managing stuff like that. So I think that's the thing that comes up for me in terms of parents, in terms of like, well, I got to get them to do this. I got to get them to do that. There are parents now who are behaving as teachers as well as working from home and, thinking all this stuff is like, at the end of the day, it requires some energy to parent a child with diabetes. And that energy that you're putting towards work and school and all this kind of stuff, it can be exhausting. So, just to stay in the game. And I think like your tribe is doing, developing some avenues of support to be able to have people be able to just say, I had a bad day today. I didn't do it well. I let them get away with stuff, or I overreacted, or I spilled some of my tension spilled over to them. That's been a lot of my practice lately, just in terms of reassuring parents that doing the best that they can, keep it up. And for the kids kids are also feeling the tension. And like I was talking about, kids are disappointed. Kids are sad. Kids are fearful about what's going to happen and how are their friends and colleagues and all this kind of stuff and what's going on. So I think the general thing is, as I was saying before, about just making sure that people do what they need to do. People have missed more appointments, though, I have to say, in my experience, in terms of doing telephone care. It seems like it's not as important for some people as an actual visit. It's easier to shrug it off. It's easier to not show up. So that's been a little bit of the work about calling people repeatedly and saying, hey, we got a schedule thing. We can work on stuff. We can do this. We can, just reassuring them that it will not be a waste of time, that we don't have to say face to face, but at least to stay connected around that area of how are you doing? What are you doing? What obstacles are getting in your way? How can we work on that? Yeah.
I think that's something we've seen as well here at the Family Centre, and we're a little worried about that, that switch to the new normal, and this is going to be normal for quite some time. You know, access to healthcare will be by telehealth, and we do want to see patients and families still connected to their care teams, and yet we can see the same thing playing out. There is sort of this sense of, I might not have to, because I don't have to front up physically, it may be of a little less value. And so I think that's something that we've been really clear in relation to telehealth is, you know, this is an opportunity for one-on-one time in the same way as clinic. We've got it all on the screen now, and thank goodness for downloadable CGM and Libre reports and pump report and all of that sort of stuff that we now have, because I think it would be very challenging if we were, you know, back with the diabetes books that we used to fill out and all of those sorts of things, although a number of patients are still managing with those. And but look, I think, yeah, we have had to pivot the service, and I think that as time goes on, people will start to say, okay, yeah, this is my new normal. I can connect, I can still get real value out of the appointment, and in a way it's a bonus because I don't have to travel. I don't have to take time out of work to, you know, when I go and see my doctor, I have to take nearly half a day off work sometimes because he lives a long way from me and I have to wait all the time. So that there's none of that. It's, you know, this is healthcare beamed into your living room, quite literally. It's kind of cool.
The thing is, though, that I think I'm trying to work out ways that we can do more creative things, telehealth-wise. So having a panel discussion of teens talking about how they're coping, you know, with a facilitator, or having a panel of doctor, nurse, dietitian sitting there answering questions for a call-in, sort of webinar-y kind of thing, you know, things that we were not doing a lot of before, maybe doing more of now, you know, or having shared medical appointments, meaning group visits, you know, where the visit's not just with one person, given that it's harder to organize and choreograph, especially online. But I think after we've had now a couple of months of practice, we're getting better at it. But I think shared medical appointments where people come, like maybe 3 or 4 families at the same time, and we're talking about stuff and we organize it in such a way that everybody hears from the other how it's happening, as opposed to keeping it a one-on-one thing, which I think is a little two-dimensional sometimes. I find that for myself and with families that I work with. And I've known that in my work in doing group things that people actually like the group stuff. And I think to make it manageable, make them small, you know, but have panel discussions, you know, schedule stuff that goes like, you know, 5 teens are going to be talking about what hell it is to live with their parents under the same roof 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and manage their diabetes, you know, that kind of stuff, right? Just things like that. I think we're going to have to think a little bit out of the box. I know in our clinic and in Montana, things are pretty appointments. You see the doctor, you see the nurse, you see the dietitian, that kind of stuff. But we haven't done any kind of like real fun, dynamic, goofy things. And if I know anything about your center,
I'm keeping all these ideas, Joe.
You are really good at that shit. You guys are, like, I would say, leading the pack on that.
Well, thank you for that, Joe. And I think you're absolutely right. What a terrific space this has made for us to be creative in whole new ways.
Yeah.
And reach loads more people with, you know, developing content, inviting people to come online and do that sort of, I mean, the shared health appointment, I mean, how brilliant would it be able to be on a shared appointment like this with an endocrinologist, a diabetes educator, and a dietitian, rather than having to go and see them all individually. I mean, there'd be such value for patients and things like that. And maybe this is making the way for us to, now that we're used to it or getting used to it, to create experiences like that for patients. That would be awesome.
And I also think like having 3 or 4 different patients, with their parents or parent or whoever, so that they get the support from each other. And I think now more than ever, it's important to know that we're not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think doing that in a format and hearing from people, not only would that be amazing for that in that experience to be part of a panel like that, but if there's an opportunity for that then to be seen by a community of people of, oh wow, the feeling with type 1 of that isolation being lifted when you see and talk with another person or group of people who live with it, that's transformative. And I think it's our challenge now to figure out how we can do that in a digital context, because that's the stuff, that's the magic at the family centre that you feel when you walk in and you walk into a community of people and a team who all live with it too, and you can drop your shoulders and go, oh my gosh, they get it. And how can we make that magic happen online?
Totally. And how to pick yourself up if you fall down. Like I found that given this pandemic thing with the virus, and I find that little knocks have more of an impact on me in terms of being able to recover from them more quickly. So I had my bike stolen out of my garage a couple of months ago. And it was, I was about to start working on getting some, new equipment and that kind of stuff. And I've tried to work it out. I didn't have enough money to buy a really expensive bike like the ones that got stolen, but I had enough money to buy a rowing machine. So I went online to try and buy a rowing machine. And it turns out that you can't get a rowing machine until next September. Everybody in the United States is buying the rowing machine for their home gym because we're all staying inside. So I'm thinking like, okay, fuck it. I'm not exercising, And I gotta give myself a day or two of like, okay, sinking into that pit and going like, Christ, this is crazy, So I went online and I started doing the stuff that I need to do to get a bike. But I find that knocks, it's harder with the emotional energy required to deal with the emotional and psychological aspects of the pandemic. I find that I have that much less reserve, which is why it's so much more important for people to stay connected and for all of us not to be judgmental of each other when we fall apart, but to be there to help pick us up when we do, and just to be there, as opposed to,
And to be gentle with ourselves.
Yeah, and
I
maybe
think,
not offer suggestions, but just say, hey, I hear you,
Yeah, and
hug.
hug. Socially distant hugs.
Yeah.
Look, Joe, I think that's a really nice place to wrap.
Right.
with a socially distanced hug and
Totally.
And that idea of holding space for each other and giving permission for the stuff that comes up to come up, and being gentle with ourselves and each other.
Yeah, and listen, if there are any families in your center, tribe that need help, I'm totally available.
Thank you, Joe. That's
happy to do any sessions or anything like that at no cost for the pandemic.
That is a very, very kind offer, and I'm sure that there are people in our community who met you way back when you spoke at our very, very first event.
I know, I feel like honored.
Before the family center even was fully open,
yes, and before the air conditioning was really working. It was hot that night. Yeah, the AC was like off, on, off, on.
I don't think it had probably been installed, and there was certainly a whole lot of flooring around the corner that hadn't been installed. And I thought, this guy's in town, we're going to have an event around that. And I've still got that photo of you with the koala painted on your face.
Yeah, totally. I love it.
Loads of good memories. Hey, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. And I'll be sure to share your website with the community so that they can reach out to you should they need you. Thanks for all of your thoughts. Cheers.
May the